Hello, and welcome back to another Deck Tech by the Laboratory Maniacs. I'm Dan, and today I am joined by Lime Blue, otherwise known as Voidia. So Lime Blue is an excellent competitive EDH pilot. He managed to go 6-0 through the round-robin portion of the Winter 2017 competitive EDH tournament with this particular list that we're going to talk about today, which is Sidisi Brood Tyrant combo. So thank you so much for coming on and joining us. I know we've been wanting to talk about this list in particular for a while, as it's just torn up the tournament.
Yes, it handled me very well through the first couple of rounds.
Yeah, it has had some impressive games. So let's get right into it. So tell us a little bit about this commander.
Sidisi Brood Tyrant is a Sultai general, so she's by default in probably the best colors in competitive EDH. She gets access to the blue counterspells, the black tutors, the green creatures, and ramp. So she's set up to do powerful things because the colors support whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I know black, blue, and green are always thrown around as the top three colors in competitive EDH. You splash white or red when you want to for specific effects, but if you're not core, like one or at least two of those primary colors, you're going to have a hard time. And Sultai is just all of them. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty fun to have. In this deck in particular, do you actively play with Sidisi as your commander?
No. I would say that casting Sidisi is usually a sign of something has gone wrong. Sidisi is probably about plan D, shall we say? And
interesting.
Yeah, it's the meta that I have been testing with knows that if I am casting Sidisi onto an empty board, that I have run out of gas.
It's interesting. That's true of so many competitive EDH decks. Their commander, while certainly powerful cards, they're not necessarily core to the strategy. They're usually very effective backup plans, or at least moderately effective backup plans. Is Sidisi in that kind of a position for you?
Yeah. Sidisi is used as a backup plan in the sense that she generates a lot of creatures, so that's very good when either you're getting attacked or you're trying to focus down the ad nauseum deck at the table. And when I was first starting this deck, I played with Skulloth on Doomsday Zur and Angel Forge on Prosh Food Chain, so putting the nails to people was very important.
Makes a lot of sense. That's some of the OG crowd.
Yeah.
So, if Sidisi is one of your super backup plans, how do you usually win?
So, the primary plan is to get Hermit Druid into play as fast as possible and untap with it.
What is that going to enable for you?
When I activate Hermit Druid, paying green mana, it reveals cards from my library until I hit a basic land. I don't run any basic lands, so what it actually does is puts all of my library into my graveyard, just flips the whole thing right over.
That is certainly a powerful effect. And I'm assuming you have some pretty powerful ways of capitalizing on having access to your entire deck?
Yes. The graveyard in this deck is very much your second hand. So once all of your deck is in your graveyard, you want to reanimate the card Necrotic Ooze. And the way you do that is by flashing back Dread Return, because that is a reanimation spell that you can cast from the graveyard. Now, the flashback cost on that is sacrifice 3 creatures. Hermit Druid is in play, so that's step 1. Step 2 is Narcomoeba. Narcomoeba triggers when it goes from your library to your graveyard, as in when you flip your whole deck with Hermit Druid, it comes into play. From there, you need part 3. Now, in my version of the build, I spend a blue mana to unearth Fate Stitcher, which is some random card from a Lara block that comes into play for a blue mana, has haste, and can untap a permanent or tap a permanent. Usually what that means is I'll be untapping the land I used to unearth it, and voila, we have 3 creatures in play. This is the bare bones. If you're going off with Hermit Druid and you already have a couple of mana dorks, you don't have to go through the extra steps. But Dread Return on Necrotic Ooze gives you a host of a lot of different abilities. The first part of the combo is you use Wall of Roots ability as inherited by Necrotic Ooze to put a -0/-1 counter on Necrotic Ooze and make a green mana. From there, use the green mana to activate the ability as gained by competitive EDH staple Thornling. Yeah, Thornling is one of those, we play the bad cards to make the good cards good. My friends have described Sidisi Brood Tyrant as the world's greatest Thornling deck. Because the card is not good.
No, it is not.
From there, Necrotic Ooze can use conventional tap abilities, and it will make a mana due to any number of the mana dorks in the deck. And from there, it can untap itself using Devoted Druid's ability of put a -1/-1 counter on this creature. Now, you can use the newly printed Channeler Initiate from Amonkhet to tap, remove that counter to make a mana of any color. You can then put a counter on it to untap it and remove that counter to tap it again. And so on and so forth, you generate infinite mana. From there, we look to Walking Ballista, which has the ability 4 mana of any color, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. You make an infinitely large Necrotic Ooze, and then you use the Triskelion-esque ability to remove those counters and ping your opponents to death.
That is pretty cool. So this is a deck that has actively gained some powerful effects from actually recently printed sets.
This deck got infinitely better from Kaladesh with the printing of Walking Ballista that filled so many holes in the deck. And the Channeler Initiate combo means that I get to play actual good cards. There was a way around this before Channeler Initiate was spoiled. We didn't generate infinite mana, but we did put infinite +1/+1 counters on Necrotic Ooze. We did this by using the Innistrad draft bombs of Bloodline Keeper and Grimgrin Corpseborn.
I remember seeing those when I looked at your list for the first time and just scratching my head
Baffling.
really hard. It really is. That's the best word for it.
Yep. Once you got haste, you tapped to make a vampire with Bloodline Keeper, and then sacrificed it with Grimgrin to untap and put a +1/+1 counter, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so that definitely got streamlined a bit.
Now we get to run Mana Dorks, as opposed to 5 mana enters the battlefield tapped creatures.
I like that. That's a great upgrade for this particular deck.
Although I must say, if Sidisi is Plan D, rest in peace Plan Q of just beat them to death with vampires.
Hey, whatever works. So on the spirit of those things, what happens if things aren't going your way? What happens if your Hermit Druid gets killed, or there's a rest in peace out, or various other kinds of oh no, Plan A through whatever got abandoned for some reason? What do you do?
So, before you even start looking at what your opponents are doing to stop you, has your deck cooperated with you? Because occasionally it doesn't do that. The thing about Dread Return is, it's free when you cast it from your graveyard. It's not free when you cast it from your hand. Occasionally you draw pieces that you need to be in your graveyard or in your deck when you activate Hermit Druid.
That That is definitely an issue for some decks. I know from experience, playing Boon Weaver, it's just like drawing the Karmic Guide the turn you're about to go off is just the worst feeling in the world. Because know you're doomed in that deck because you don't have Brainstorm, or you didn't have Brainstorm. But yeah, I can see how this deck would have similar issues.
Mm-hmm. At one point, I was playing a game. I was poised to win. I had Hermit Druid. I untapped, and I drew Laboratory Maniac. Didn't feel great. So, we did some reaching, and we found a card that makes no sense as a card or even as a name. We were running the mighty Phantasmagorian.
That guy. Manaless Dredge staple. Phantasmagorian.
People ask me why I'm running a 7-mana 6/6. I'll be honest with them. Didn't know those numbers existed. Phantasmagorian has one line of text that we care about. And that is, discard 3 cards. Return Phantasmagorian from your graveyard to your hand. So, if you draw your Dread Return, your Laboratory Maniac, or any of the pieces that you need to be in your graveyard, you trade them. You trade them for Phantasmagorian. You're happy about it.
I'd say that's a pretty good swap.
So that's what happens when you're fighting yourself. When other people are fighting you, you have the backup plan of flashing back Memory's Journey from your graveyard to save something that's getting targeted by, let's say, a Fairy Macabre, and shuffle it back into your deck. You can usually target, the piece that they're trying to exile, or just put Laboratory Maniac and a draw spell back into your deck, and from there you're good to go.
That's a pretty fun card. I always like that as a nice, clean backup to, oh no, Graveyard Hate. I wished I could have run it in Boon Weaver back when it was an Abzan deck.
Yeah.
So, how do you position yourself to navigate towards your primary win conditions?
There's a lot of fast mana in the deck. We run every single piece of acceleration that can get us to 2 mana on turn 1, which lets us cast a turn 1 Hermit Druid. So, as it came out in the semifinals of the tournament, I got to start the game with a Gemstone Caverns in play, and untap and play a land and have access to more mana.
That game was a house. Oh man, you were threatening a kill like every turn.
Basically, that is the primary goal of the deck, is to be the threat.
Yeah, you were definitely, oh man. You were asking a question all the time. It was scary.
That question is usually, do I win? As evidenced by that gameplay, you are either looking to cast Hermit Druid, or cast a tutor that can get Hermit Druid, or draw into cards that can get you to Hermit Druid or a tutor, and you want to be building advantage when you are not threatening.
Makes sense. So, main game plan is put Hermit Druid in play, and everything is kind of warped around activate Hermit Druid.
Yes, that is plan A 100%.
So how do you protect yourself from other decks? And in a similar vein, how do you interact with opposing strategies?
So I run a modest protection suite of a few counterspells, a couple removal spells. The deck wants to run all of the super cheap counter magic, so Pact of Negation, Swan Song, Flusterstorm, and I'm currently trying out Dispel as another way of protecting the combo. And what people a lot of times suggest for the deck is, well, why don't you run Force of Will? Why don't you run Mana Drain? These are considered the best counterspells. And Mana Drain is more of a reactive counterspell. You want to stop someone's 4-drop and then untap and cast an 8-drop. Sidisi doesn't have those. You don't want to cast Phantasmagorian. I have. It doesn't feel good. And so I cut mana drain because holding up a 2-mana counterspell is difficult on the turn you go off. And Force of Will, the sort of quintessential free counterspell, protect your degenerate combo. I don't run enough blue cards. I couldn't consistently pay the alternate casting cost, and if you thought a 2-mana counterspell was bad, 5 mana is even worse.
Yeah, Force of Will in particular is definitely one of those interesting cards where even if you have a sufficient blue count, it is incredibly powerful, don't get me wrong, but you really need to actively consider the real cost of exiling a blue card from your hand. In a graveyard-reliant deck, maybe that Laboratory Maniac is sitting in your hand dead, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can exile it.
That does not count as a blue card, friends.
Yeah, it is an interesting card in this deck, and it makes sense that it's one of the ones you omit.
Mm-hmm. It was a difficult decision to make, especially after trading for a $90 card, but it was one of those things where I really had to sit down with a group of very dedicated friends who have been helping me test this deck for probably going on 3 years now, and as the numbers don't add up, we can't support it.
It's rough, but that's what tuning the last slot in a deck often is.
Yep.
So what does your deck do better than other similar decks? Be it Hermit Druid decks, be it Bug Combo, be it whatever.
I think I'm better than other Hermit Druid decks, which have really fallen off the map. There aren't a ton of them anymore. It used to be 5-color Scion was the Hermit Druid deck. And then people learned that Hermit Druid is actually very easy to stop. It's just fast. And I don't have access to red, which is really important for the Morsel Hoarder going off at mana ability speed, but I make up for it by getting to run more protection. I get to run a higher density of counterspells, and I have other combo backup plans if they exile Hermit Druid.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think the only people left running Hermit Druid that I know of are Tenrose and Chemtails on their Angel of Glory's Rise combo list. And then I think Lobster actually is now in his Cephalid Breakfast Protean Hulk list. But yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting Hermit Druid decks just because of the density of protection in it. Maybe as a factor because you can't combo off unreactively, but I think that's definitely interesting.
In comparison to other bug combo decks, like for quite some time, the other Sidisi list of note was a dedicated food chain build. It didn't run the Phyrexian Devourer Necrotic Ooze combo, and it didn't run Hermit Druid. And it countered that by running more support for food chain. And if you got stopped, you didn't have a way to refuel. My deck has such a high density of tutors and draw spells, and at any given moment, you can stop the game and think, okay, there are 60 cards left in my deck, a full 40 of them win me the game.
Yeah, I think, as evidenced by your semifinals match, you definitely have a density of ways to get to a kill. And I think the other primarily food chain Sidisi list is that the one that Lil Brother was working on a lot. That seems to have been homogenizing, honestly. Like, your two lists seem to have slowly been creeping closer to one cohesive list. Even though there's still some distinctions between them, they seem like they've gotten a lot more similar in the past 6 months or so.
Yes, I've been talking with him a lot on Discord, and between my list, his list, and then one other prominent Sidisi list, there are, I believe, 80 cards that all three of us are running, another 20 or so that two of us are running, and then 18, I think, that are one-offs between each person. And a lot of those come down to meta decisions and personal preference. The core of the deck is the same, and it's really just which packages of support do I want to play.
You heard it here, folks, first. Collaboration makes decks better.
Yes, this deck would not be nearly the powerhouse that it is if I did not have my team that I test with twice a week working on this deck constantly. Things like Phyrexian Revoker are specific meta decisions because I'm fighting two dedicated control Tasigur decks. Yeah, it's... when you're trying to threaten the win, and Tasigur can keep rebuying the same piece of answer, it's difficult. I power through, but it's difficult.
I know how frustrating that can be. Cameron has ground me out more than once.
Yeah. The four people that are my primary testing partners, two of them are on Tasigur Control, one is on Combo Brea, and the other is on an Abzan Hate Bears list. And I am the threat. I'm the one that, do you have an answer to what Lime is doing? If not, you really can't stand up to what we bring to the table.
That's a pretty cool spot to be in. I like it a lot.
As a result, it's made the deck absurdly strong and resilient because they keep coming up with new ways to put me in a smaller and smaller box, saying, okay, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And every time I try to find the tiniest little crack to just wiggle out of, and it's navigating a labyrinth, and the Tasigur decks are building the walls, and, you know, I find a way to wiggle out by, you know, I'm trying to combo off with Labman, so I can't go down to no cards in library because my Tasigur opponent has a Cephalid Coliseum and can just make me draw before Labman comes into play. The counter to that is unearth Fate Stitcher early, tap down their Cephalid Coliseum. You just find new ways to use all of your pieces to fight whatever boxes and walls you're being put in during that particular game.
That is fascinating, and something that I think a lot of people really ought to test more against, just so that they can figure out all those crazy tech lines that come up once every 100 games that just give you the sweetest plays to make.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that I've been piloting this deck in some variation, honestly, before Sidisi even came out. This deck has evolved from quite a tremendous leap. It used to be so bad. You know, I understand most of the other competitive decks and could pilot them to some efficacy. I stand by that there is no one who can pilot my deck the way I do.
That's probably true. Years of practice, it makes the difference between a good player on a bad deck and a bad player on a good deck in formats like Legacy and Vintage, and that is most certainly true in competitive EDH as well. So, keeping in mind some of that whole boxing you in thing, what particular weaknesses does this list have?
You're a graveyard deck. That opens you up to graveyard hate. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Tormod's Crypt, Nihil Spellbomb, Fairy Macabre, Shred Memory, all of the various spells that you people should be looking at now that Hulk is unbanned. Hulk unbanning was not great because people will be trying to fight it, which incidentally gives them a lot of tech against us. on Sidisi.
Yeah, that awkwardly positions the deck for sure.
Yeah. Although, even before Hulk was unbanned, I decided to put Trickbind in the deck because it stops Breya, it stops Tasigur, it stops all of the artifact graveyard hate, which is very common in my meta. And, you know, you Trickbind the Hulk trigger. Congrats. You put it in your graveyard.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So now let's talk about some possible hands that this deck can draw. We've had you get a couple out. Let's talk about the first hand.
The first hand is probably the God Hand. There are other hands that win very quickly, but this is probably about as good as it gets. It is Hermit Druid, Mana Crypt, Swan Song, Botanical Sanctum, Mox Diamond, Wooded Foothills, and Shallow Grave. So, what this does is you get to play 4 mana on turn 1. Always a good start.
That's for sure.
And you get to play Hermit Druid and hold up Swan Song as protection. And if they do kill your Hermit Druid, you have Shallow Grave as backup for the next turn. The hand is very good. It has Hermit Druid, a way to get it out faster than turn 2, a backup plan in the form of Shallow Grave, and protection in the form of Swan Song.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. That's how you die on turn 2, consistently.
Yep.
I like it.
Guess we'll go to the next hand.
Yeah.
Which consists of Flusterstorm, Entomb, Elvish Mystic, Yavimaya Coast, Bayou, Intuition, and Sylvan Library. So, this hand is interesting. It's probably about as mediocre as it gets. You know, you have acceleration in the form of Elvish Mystic, you've got card advantage in the form of Sylvan Library, you've got a tutor with Intuition and protection in Flusterstorm, but you're never really doing any of these things at the time you want them. This is a reasonable hand to keep into a control-heavy game, or something where... This is a hand I would keep on game 5 of the evening, after having won a couple already. It's a good hand, but if your goal is to apply pressure, it's not going to get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. In such a tempo-heavy format, wherein you're the deck looking to ask questions, that hand's not really asking as much.
Yeah. This hand gets also a lot worse with Hulk being unbanned, because now you have to think about, as long as the deck includes green, you have to think, okay, this deck could be asking questions too.
Yeah. Yep.
Hulk unbanned definitely will make you play significantly more conservatively into any table that includes Thrasios Timna, or anything in those color combinations. It's sad, but people have been discussing Atraxa as a way to get an extra slot in the deck.
That's true. That's clever. Oh, I don't know if I agree with it, but yeah.
But, you know, back when Partner was first spoiled, people were saying, it's like, well, why wouldn't you always run Partners? Get down to 98 cards, slightly more consistent.
Yeah.
You never know.
That's true. So, how about another hand?
This hand, and I've actually drawn this in a game, is by far the worst hand that I have ever seen, and probably the worst hand possible in all of EDH. This hand includes Thornling, Phantasmagorian, Eternal Scourge, Phyrexian Devourer, Narcomoeba, Memory's Journey, and Grin the Corpseborn, back when we were still running him. So, this hand does nothing. And even more so than your typical, oh, I have no lands, I do nothing. This does nothing. Yeah, you never cast Thornling, you never cast Phantasmagorian, you never cast Devourer. It's dark days when you cast Narcomoeba. Grimgrin you don't cast. You cast half of Memory's Journey, and Eternal Scourge you cast when you can cast it forever.
I can't even think of a reasonable line wherein you win the game off of that. That's just terrible.
Nope.
Like, your best out is Food Chain, cast Eternal Scourge, and cast Phantasmagorian, Thornling, and Grimgrin, and just beat people with fatties.
Sometimes you can just hit people. This is not one of those times.
Oh, that's just bad. Alright. Do you have any other hands for us?
I have one more hand that is very good, but comes down to how much experience you have with the deck and how much experience you have with your specific metagame. This hand that I shuffled up was Worldly Tutor, Command Tower, Ancient Tomb, Brainstorm, Phyrexian Revoker, Green Sun Zenith, and Nature's Claim. This hand is really good, but it's doing a lot of different things at the same time. Honestly, there are several reasonable turn ones with this hand. You can Command Tower and Worldly Tutor for Hermit Druid on your end step. You can Command Tower and Brainstorm, trying to, dig for ramp or more action. In my meta specifically, it's very viable to Ancient Tomb Phyrexian Revoker naming Tasigur. Turn off 2 of the decks at the table. You can Command Tower holding up Nature's Claim in case someone starts dropping artifact combo stuff. What will most likely happen is, from this hand, I would probably start with either the Brainstorm or the Phyrexian Revoker, and then, because I have Ancient Tomb, go for a Green Sun Zenith for Druid on turn 2. Because that mitigates a lot of your issues, and this hand is very good, but opens you up to outplaying yourself. This hand I would keep, but then spend probably another couple minutes figuring things out.
Yeah, that is a very, very interesting hand. It's always kind of cool.
Yeah.
Seeing, like, the myriad of directions that even just a couple of staple cards in the same hand can pull you in.
Sidisi has so many lines. And honestly, I usually would prefer a mix of this hand and the Sylvan Library hand, because you're not being pulled in so many directions that you have a game plan. So usually they come out a mix of the 3 hands, and then occasionally you miss hard and you get the Phantasmagorian heavy hands, and you just chalk those up to making the good cards good.
That is pretty cool. So, Sidisi Brood Tyrant combo. Blazingly fast deck with so many distinct and diverse lines that it's capable of threatening any number of wins on just about every turn. You've seen the list. It is an awesome one. We have some videos of the deck, specifically in the semifinals, showcasing the extreme power that this build has, and some of the player skill of Lime Blue in particular. So thank you so much for joining us on the Lab Maniacs and doing this deck tech with us as the only undefeated player in the round robin portion of the tournament. It was awesome to get to see your deck and to be able to comment on it, and it was awesome to have you here with me. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. I love talking about the deck. I've been working on it for years now, and finally gives me a way to explain why one of the most competitive decks in the format is running Phantasmagorian.
Yeah, it is. Bad cards are occasionally necessary.
Yes, you live with some evils. This is just a degenerate pile of cards that somehow happens to work together in this bizarre amalgam of a contraption.
Well, you have certainly done a good job convincing many people, including me in particular, to give this bad boy a try. So, thank you again. Thank you all for watching. This has been another Deck Tech by the Laboratory Maniacs. I'll see you next time.